Welcome, everybody. It's Tuesday, June 5th, and this is Inside the Line. I am Joe Turner, and that guy over there in Chicago, Illinois, is Dan Black, not his usual spot of Philadelphia. Over in Chicago, doing an internship, doing big things, but the show must go on for years to guys. A lot to do. The last time we thought it would be the Rockets and either the Cavs in the NBA Finals. Both those ended up going to 7. LeBron James and was able to help the young upstart who really just didn't have it down the stretch. Then over the West, Chris Paul got hurt, and we can go back and forth about how much that had on that team. But the Warriors wins, and we get Warriors part 4. But before we get into that, because it's now 2 games, I want to ask you, how much of an impact did Chris Paul have on the podcast?
I think he had a tremendous impact. Looking at just those games 6 and 7, especially offensively, it looked like a completely different offense than when he was controlling the ball for the majority of the time than when James Harden was doing it. When James Harden was controlling the ball, which he did probably 80% of the time in those 2 games, at least in terms of bringing the ball up the court and starting the offense, it was really James Harden and 3 other guys surrounding the three-point line and then Clint Capella down low. There was no real ball movement. There was no bodies moving to move the defense. There wasn't anybody willing to take a 2-pointer instead of I mean, their game plan is very, as everybody knows, they're put together by analytics, and analytics say it's better to take a 3-pointer than a mid-range jumper or a long 2, because if you make it, you get an extra point, or it's better to just go inside, which worked in game 7 in the first half. They gave the ball to Clint Capella a ton down low, and that was working great. And then obviously we know what happened after that with 27 missed threes in a row, which is, I did the math, and had they made all of them, it would have equaled 81 points, so that would have been an incredible scoreline for sure in that with all those. But I mean, you think about it, they could have easily stayed in the game if they give up a quarter of those threes for mid-range 2s or whatever, or just moving the ball. So I thought that was a huge difference. And then in Game 6, a ton of turnovers. I think that doesn't happen if Chris Paul is there, because he's such a good ball handler, such a good facilitator. He makes the right pass, and then also defensively, he's a hound. So it's what I noticed was a lot of something that I'm not surprised about that sort of made Houston struggle in the playoffs, is that when James Harden can't be the leader. James Harden is a very talented player, but just like Russell Westbrook, he can't be counted on as a guy that the team has to look to, because he's very self-centered in a way. With that's what made Houston struggle these past couple of years with just James Harden as the main guy, because he's very, in terms of offensively, he's very self-centered. That's why bringing Chris Paul was so great. He sort of brought him back down to earth. And so without him, you saw a follow-the-leader mentality. Well, if James Harden can shoot 1 million shots a game, why can't we? He's doing it. No one's going to yell at him. You know, no one's going to tell him to not do that. So without him and having James Harden as the leader, we saw the same things that made them struggle these past couple of years once again. But I think if Chris Paul is there, they would have won Game 6 pretty easily. They were up at halftime by a good amount. And then the usual third quarter for Golden State came around. But if you have a Chris Paul, I think it's diminished a bit, and they still find a way to pull it out and are in the finals. But It's the luck of
we
Chris
went
Paul.
over this, the ball-centric shooting guards, the James Harden, and now let's talk that's the era. You use the floor general to distribute the ball to those shooters. And if he was there, not only did the turnovers that they cut down, but they probably take a few of those 27 feet because they'll be more open shots. And they only need to go down so close. And he probably wins that game. And is on the end.
Right.
But it's not what we want to happen is a war as war. But much more shock, game one was not a blowout for Golden State. It was very close on the stretch. Golden State was able to pull it off thanks to a huge wonder by J.R. Smith. So, before we get into the wonders specifically, what were your initial takeaways from game one? Because you know, of course, two was the blowout we expected of Golden State. The Cavs are probably come down going to game one. Now they get to go back to game one tomorrow. So, is the series going to be that we thought it was? The Cavs bounce back.
Well, in regards to game one, the heartbreak I felt for LeBron James after that was equal to when the Eagles lose to the Cowboys. When any of my teams that I've rooted for a long time loses a tough game to, a rival, or just any kind of big game, that's the kind of heartbreak I had for LeBron James because he put everything he had into that game, and the guys that he had their backs in the past. He had J.R. Smith's back. If it wasn't for LeBron James, J.R. Smith wouldn't have been re-signed by the Cavs. And people will say I had an argument with Jack Grossman. I know you know Jack over Twitter about this whole thing and how he said, well, basically if LeBron James was the one who brought those guys in and who vouched for them and wanted them to be there, this is sort of on him. And I said, in that case you're right, but he wanted to bring them in because he was not only friends with them, but trusted them to make the right choice on the basketball court. And when you've been in the league for over a decade, you expect a guy like J.R. Smith to be able to know what's going on. A rookie would know what's going on. So you expect him. Now, one of the things that I noticed was, for some reason, LeBron James was not in the block next to Kevin Durant, but that's a whole other thing, which obviously if LeBron's down there, it's a completely different story, but still, I felt so bad for him because you can't play a better game than that. To carry them after the season that he had with carrying them through 82 games and then through the playoffs with 2 series going 7 games, that was sort of that icing on the cake, proving game that everything that he did wasn't a fluke leading up to it. But yeah, George Hill's got to hit that free throw. J.R. Smith's just got to know what's going on. And it's funny, I don't know if you saw the video that Darren Rovell put out today on Twitter, and it was basically you shouldn't be surprised J.R. Smith wasn't paying attention because during one game the game was being played and he thought it was a timeout, so he went to say what's up to someone on the other team, and someone and whoever they were playing, another guy on the court just went in for an easy dunk. It's something that it's really unexplainable to say that they deserve to lose that game.
Yeah, George Hill gets a little bit of a pass. No one's talking about he missed a free throw. A gimme. And he missed it. Could have given the Cavs the lead and forced the Warriors to take a late shot. Instead of course, he misses it. He gets the foul. And instead of putting it back up, we're looking for LeBron James, who was wide open. He dribbles in the corner and then back and of course, by the time he realizes his mistake, clock and expired. So then they overtime, and LeBron understandably just disgruntled, his heart. It looked like and just like ripped his heart out because the Cavs had in overtime, and the Warriors on to steamroll.
I mean, and it also goes back to that overturned call. All of this could have been completely overlooked had, George Hill's missed free throw would have been overlooked. J.R. Smith's blunder would have been overlooked if they just hadn't overturned the call. And the reason I feel like the call was so highly debated is because they went to the replay. Like, if they would have just said a charge, no one would have said. I mean, I'm sure Kevin Durant would have said something to the refs, but everyone just would have went on with their day. It would have been, all right, Cavaliers played their heart out. They deserve to get this win. But it's the fact that they went to the replay and then changed it on such a close call. It's like, come on, that one got to me the most, I think.
See, and I'm not the biggest LeBron fan, so I understand. They shot not have gone to replay and then overturned a bang play. That being said, to me, I don't know. It looked like a block. I don't think it was outside the restricted area.
They said
I don't think it was that. That being said, let's call it a charge. I'm not to give LeBron a charge.
Right.
But yeah, so that was swallow.
It's just
still. Sorry. One more second. Before it's like they LeBron was. They had chances to win after that, and then the fact that he wasn't the last shot, or the JR did. There wasn't even. They had a chance to, and the Warriors knocked the ball. They didn't even really take that.
Right. Well, the thing to me is this just continues the narrative of the poor officiating that we've seen not only throughout the regular season but especially the playoffs, either not calling things at the very end of games or calling them when they're pointless. Like, I remember was it game 1 of the Western Conference Finals, they called a foul, an over-the-back foul on Sean Livingston with 0.5 seconds left. Like, what is the point of that? What do you get from that? Like why? Or the missed call in the game 5 of the Sixers Celtics series where Aaron Baines fouls Embiid and they don't call it, or in game 1 game 1 of the finals, the strip that they said was on LeBron that they said was or he stripped Kevin Durant, but they called it a foul, and then the same thing happened the other way, but they didn't call it a foul on the Warriors when they did it to George Hill. It's just continue like. If you call it something, just leave it like that, especially when it's late in the game, in the finals. Like, are you serious? How are you gonna make something on a judgment call like that? It's not like it's something where it's a 3-pointer where you can clearly say, okay, his foot was on the line, his foot wasn't on the line, his foot was in front of the 3-point line, his foot was behind it, or an out of bounds play or something like that. Where it's clearly evident. I mean. You're allowed on a charge. You're allowed to move a little. Like, you don't have to be a stick. You don't have to be straight as a stick. You can as long as you're basically planted by the time you make contact, your foot can move. It's just how it works, which is what happened. And to me, I think at that point of the game, you really just took away everything, not from the game, but from the series.
So you think that's
yeah. I mean, that's one of those games where everyone coming into it knew that the upper hand would solely be with the Warriors, and when a team plays, specifically LeBron James, plays that way, and he's earned so many calls, and you're going to make a call like that late and take away all the momentum that they would have had because they were up by 2. you don't make that call. It goes for the Cavaliers. They have the opportunity to dribble the ball out or dribble the timeout. I'm sorry, and get fouled and get free throws and all that. But then again, maybe George Hill misses some of them. But still, it gives them a chance to just close it out and go up 1-0, and who knows what happens the rest of the series. But you saw it in overtime. They were done. LeBron was disgusted. You saw it after the game in the press conference. You saw it in Game 2. There was really nothing. And you look at the Warriors, they haven't played tremendously. They've just played at the right time. Like, they picked it up at the right time. They played really well in the fourth quarter in Game 2. And at the end of the day, that's how you win. It's not how you start, it's how you finish is the old narrative, and that's what they've been doing throughout the playoffs, because throughout the past few series, they haven't started off incredibly well, but they finish in spectacular fashion. So that's what I expect to continue to happen. I think maybe they win. Was Game 3 tomorrow night? Yeah. So I think Cleveland will win tomorrow. It'll be LeBron's last win as a Cleveland Cavalier, and he's going to give him everything he's got. But it's just there's just I don't see it going. I don't see it coming back to Cleveland. Besides, obviously, Game 4.
Yeah, we're on the second for sure. As far as the Chargers, they are allowed to, if his foot was in the restricted area, which clearly it wasn't.
Right.
And that's all. You should have been over that. Like I said, I would have called it a block in fast time, but once you call it a charge, he's not in the restricted. You gotta leave it.
Right.
You can't. If that's the case, why are we having this at all? We're just going to the replay on every call. But back there, end of game 1, you have discussed LeBron James. Given that we have a couple of days off in between games, one of the narratives going now, a lot of the sports podcasts is, did LeBron react unfairly to how badly LeBron messed up? When you're LeBron James, when you're any professional athlete, you're going to be mad, especially when you put everything for that team for the game. So I would have reacted if I was LeBron exactly the same way, if not worse. But it's undeniable to look back and say, well, maybe if he had, given up, not that he, I'm not blaming, but if he would have added Jaron back and said, guys, let's get overtime, we love it, and maybe it would have gone, it would have really gone over. But I would have reacted with this spot. But I just wanted to get LeBron's reaction. Because it seems like that never.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anything at that point was going to change. I think the everything taken out of them. I mean, and the fact that he found out that they had a timeout left, that's sort of that cherry on the top of, it's one of those things are already bad and they just made it worse now. And I think they knew they had a timeout. It would have been tough for Tyronn Lue unless he specifically said, if we get a rebound, call a timeout. Because there was no way the referees were looking down towards the bench, and he would have had to sprint down to the other end to get a timeout. And there was just so much commotion that you would be mad in the moment just because of everything that happened too, and you'd be like, oh, we could have had a timeout, could have figured everything out too, and gotten a play instead of whatever happened. But it's more on J.R. Smith just being stupid than anything else. But
that's what I wanted to talk about, because I think it's pretty clear now that J.R. didn't know the score.
No, he didn't. He said he knew that it was tied. If you knew it was tied, you're not going to run the ball out with 5 seconds left. Like, you don't do that. That's plenty of time.
It's like a timeout. Like you said, not no one was looking at it. And JR's not going to call timeout. He's trying to block out because they're winning. So who was going to get timeout?
Well, that's why LeBron tried to I think LeBron
he was
LeBron didn't even know they had a timeout. I think he just suspected that they did, which is the great thing about LeBron James, just knowing things. But, I mean, it's just, for J.R. Smith to do that, and I there's no words to describe how bad it was what he did. I can't. I mean, he ruined it. He ruined the entire series for them. There's no other way to look at it because you can't come back from that mentally. And people are saying, well, like you said, what if LeBron did such and such thing? It would be one thing if LeBron, only got 20-some points, but he got 51. He was the only reason they were in that game, is because he had to take over, which is something he normally doesn't do. And when you do that and you don't repay him by paying attention, especially because, it wasn't like they were in the middle of a game. It wasn't like the Cavs had just gotten a rebound or something and were on the break. They were at the free throw line. You can look up for 2 seconds and see the time and see the score.
Yeah.
It's simple things like that at the end of a game that, to be a veteran, you should, because you're always looking around, it seems, look up at the scoreboard for half a second. Oh, we're tied. Okay. I know what's going on then. It's just, I just can't, it's unfathomable to think that someone would do that a professional would do that.
Absolutely on the job. But to Jack Rose's point, I didn't see that on Twitter. Nobody jumped in. LeBron did those guys in. But what really sealed him over was Kyrie Irving. Because those guys are accessory players. When you have two stars on your roster, Kyrie's not gone, so they only have one, and your second best player is now Kevin Love. And neither Kyle Korver nor J.R. Smith is a good enough third best player to beat the Warriors. He was counting on having Kyrie being second best, and Love was the third. And those guys stand out there reign three. But obviously, what happened. So now he's in a bad situation. But I don't think that's fault bringing it in.
Well, all I know is that play solidified the end of LeBron James in Cleveland. With everything that was leading up to it and the press conferences and everything like that, I mean, yeah, that's sort of it.
We're on the same page because we both think that little win on the game. I'm not sure who before, but I expect the Warriors to have one offensive night and LeBron will do one more show before he leaves. Now, let's leave it there for the now. Turn to the other dominating something. And it's involving a team that LeBron linked to leads the legend. And that is the GM of Philadelphia 76ers, Jerry Colangelo,
Brian,
and his 5 Twitter accounts for alleged burner Twitter. This is a weird story all around.
Yeah.
That the GM of your team is hacking your players on your handles, defending it, all, it's even weirder to see that Kevin Durant. But this is what we're dealing with now, and he is still currently employed by the Sixers. So first, just give me your official reaction as a Sixers fan to this story, and then what you want to do with Jerry going forward. Because the impression was that he would be fired, and he still may be. But right now, he's employed as a starting or at least.
My first reaction was it just took me by shock, and then it was just funny more than anything. It's like this dude's an adult, and he's got a bunch of burner accounts to talk about his, the guy that his predecessors and all that, and his players and whatever. It's just like, why? You're just do your job, pay attention to that. Who cares about the other stuff? So that was really my initial reaction. My theory is yeah, he's still employed, and I don't know why they need to really do an investigation. Like, just fire the guy. But my theory behind why they haven't fired him yet is just because I think behind closed doors they're just finding that next guy right now, whoever that may be, to replace him. That's sort of just why he's still there. That way there's not sort of a gap. They have the guy ready to go, so when they fire him, he can be waiting. When they have the press conference that he's fired, they have the other guy waiting in the wing to come out and do his thing. And I think they're gonna take their time because this is the biggest offseason for the Sixers in
franchise history.
Probably close to it. Probably, I'd say, since they drafted Allen Iverson. I would say this is probably the biggest offseason with the opportunity to have the 10th pick and the 26th pick, and you don't know, what you can do in terms of maybe moving up and whatever, and then possibly getting LeBron James along with it. So they need to make sure they have a level-headed guy that is solely focused on the finished process and all that, and making sure all hands are on deck. That way next season they can improve on just getting past the second round and getting to the conference finals and even an NBA finals, especially if they can get LeBron. So I think right now he's there because they don't want to have a lapse in time where they don't have someone in place. I think they just want to make sure that there is someone in that position once they end up firing. Because if they don't fire him, I'd be completely shocked, and I think that basically ruins their chances of getting LeBron. So I would say sooner rather than later they get rid of him, especially with the draft coming up. I think it's a couple weeks from now. So
how many if he's about to.
Right, so they definitely. I assume. I thought I thought it'd be over and done with by the end of the week. I still think that. So I expect latest, Friday, maybe Saturday, he'll be gone.
Well, if the priority is signing LeBron James, an easy answer, and a guy that's winning the job as former Cavs David Griffin. Does that fit to you, or is that kind of, are you now entirely on getting LeBron? If you don't, you got to make sure he's all right. Go ahead.
I mean, I think that'd be a great hire. LeBron and him have a great relationship. LeBron wanted him, he said the other day, he wanted the Cavs to keep him, but Dan Gilbert, being Dan Gilbert, of course, would not appease the one guy that brings money and eyeballs to his team, because without LeBron, they're terrible. And that seems to be the case every time LeBron is there, that somehow they're great, but then as soon as he leaves, the surrounding cast is awful, and they get exposed. So I think that'd be a great acquisition. He knows how to deal with young talent as well as older talent. So, to put him alongside with Ben Simmons and Embiid and hopefully LeBron and whoever else they have around there. I mean, that's just an icing on the cake type of situation, because then it can also be an even bigger, middle finger to the Cavs. Like, okay, not only did we get your guy in terms of a player, but we also got the guy who helped bring a championship to Cleveland. So I think that'd be an interesting fit in Philadelphia, but I'm not obviously in the front office at all, so I don't really know. But if you want to get LeBron, it's a great idea to bring in a guy who he trusts and likes a lot.
That'd be quite the middle finger to the Cavs. Another room is that Rich Paul represents also Ben Simmons. So I believe it might have been David Griffin that said they think that the Sixers will let go because LeBron already understands the Philadelphia division because the division is also a division. And it's true.
I mean, I don't know. I think.
Or these small rumors because everyone wants to believe he's coming there.
Right. You know, I think that definitely may. I think it's very similar to maybe the whole thing we see with high school players going to colleges based on, you know, the brand they wore in high school. You know, if your high school was sponsored by Adidas, you go to an Adidas school, or if you're sponsored by Nike school, you go to, you know, I don't know, but he does have a great relationship with Ben Simmons, obviously with Rich Paul too. It's sort of a triangle type thing. They're all together as one, and everybody considers Ben Simmons the next guy up. So it would be perfect, especially with LeBron saying that he wants to be an off-ball guy now and be more of a scorer. And obviously he showed during the finals so far that he can be a scorer. We all know he can score. He's not the guy he once was in terms of shooting, but he can still do his thing. And Ben Simmons, we know, behind the three-point line is a no-go. So definitely having a guy in Ben Simmons who can find him, and have LeBron who can teach him the ways. And then, you know, you look at the other options. Houston, after I saw what happened in Games 6 and 7, I don't like it there, because I just think if something happens to Chris Paul, since he's another year older, or something somehow happens to LeBron, we'll see the same thing throughout the season that we saw in Game 6 and 7, where James Harden has to be the leader, and that's never a good thing. You're not going to win championships that way. And then in LA, they have a bunch of money, but you'd have to sign Paul George, you sign LeBron, and then, you know, you'd have to wait another year unless you want to trade for Kawhi, and you're still in the West. It's still tough. You know, it's not an easy path. So him coming to Philadelphia right now looks like the best decision, but it also depends greatly on what happens with Brian Colangelo and everything that's going on, and, you know, that definitely plays a big role now, a big factor compared to, you know, just about a week and a half ago or so before this whole thing came out. They were definitely the front runners. I still think they are, but it definitely changes things a bit.
Yeah, there you go. But I just don't know what that's going to look like. I know LeBron wants to play off more, but I just see him sitting back as Simmons, you know, handles the ball. And the thing about Houston, I had the opposite reaction. Houston, to me, I think the best in the NBA is Chris Paul's. I think they've won the NBA title. And if Chris Paul is down, then I think James is the primary ball instead of James Harden. And Harden can still shoot and score, but he doesn't have to. Now, that I bring up with the reason that hurt is because, like I said, I think Houston they were the best NBA this year, and had it not been Paul injury, they would have won the title. So that being said, I don't know if you have to move to make enough for LeBron, but if they could attain Chris Paul, James Harden, Eric Gordon, and Clint Capella, and add LeBron James, I think that's it. I don't think they can do that. I think they have to be at least one of those other two. But still, adding LeBron and retaining possibly James Harden and Chris Paul, the best point guard of all. That's
all time.
One of them.
Oh, I thought you said the best. I was like,
no. I think he's like top 10.
Yeah, 15%.
But so I think Houston didn't work, but I think Houston was legit threat. I don't really understand the LA thing, but
I've never understood that either. Aside from the fact, you know, I hear people say, "Oh, well, you know, he can expand his brand and stuff." I'm like, he doesn't need to go to LA to do that. Like, he literally was in a feature film. He was almost a main character in Trainwreck while playing for the Cavaliers. Like, he doesn't need to be in LA. You know, he's a basketball player right now. If he wants to win championships, he shouldn't go to LA. If he wants to go become a superstar, you know, a movie star or whatever, by all means, go do that. But he's got bigger fish to fry and bigger things to worry about. But the thing about Houston is they still have to re-sign Chris Paul because he is a free. It's not like he's still under contract for the foreseeable future. He is a free agent, so it depends on what they want to do with him. Obviously, their bigger issue would be to get LeBron before Chris Paul, but part of the reasoning LeBron would go there is because of Chris Paul, so they'd have to sort of make a promise to LeBron that they would have Chris Paul alongside with him. And, you know, the issue is that, like you said, you'd probably have to get rid of a good chunk of the team that helped you win. I mean, you don't want to get rid of Clint Capella because he looks like a star big man for the future for them for a long time. He had a great relationship with James Harden and Chris Paul throughout this season. He really exploded onto the scene for the first time. And you like Eric Gordon coming off the bench. He's hot off the bench. You know, he can come in and nail shot after shot without any issue. You know, but you'd probably have to get rid of him. May have to get rid of Trevor Ariza, who is the seventh man off the bench. You know, so it would take a hit to their depth. They'd be very much a starting five heavy team, which is fine. But you know, when you have a guy like Chris Paul, who'll be 34 and continues to have injury history, and he's not getting any younger. And I sort of call it the curse of Chris Paul because it seems every team that he joins, just something happens, especially late in the season. I mean, happened every year with the Clippers, happened this year with the Rockets. So they have to think they'd find a way, I'm sure, but there's a lot of moving pieces there. Whereas if you go to Philadelphia, the main core is signed for 3, 4, 5 more years. You don't have to worry about them signing, you know, another big name free agent that year. They're set right now with their main guys and whoever they bring in through the draft or whatever. So that's why I think it makes more sense for Philadelphia than Houston. Plus, it gives him the opportunity to regress as he regresses and plays a lesser role. The Ben Simmons, Ben Simmons will be better. Joel Embiid will be better. Markelle Fultz will be better. Saric will be better. Just all those guys, all those young guys that they have acquired throughout the past couple of years. And you have to remember that they have a lot of guys overseas, too. They got Jonah Bolden, who's overseas, who's supposed to come this year, who's a good forward, you know, the power forward. So they have a lot of talent that's only going to get better. So if they can get, you know, LeBron for a 2-year deal with a third option or something like that, that by the time you get to that point when he's 35, 36, those young guys have become established veterans. And I think that's sort of the key to success for not only LeBron James as he gets older, but for the Sixers for the foreseeable future as an organization.
All right. We'll wait to see with the LeBron James making free agency and a lot of still huge summer. But sticking with Philadelphia, other big news. Once again, someone that to be Super Bowl champions. The Philadelphia Eagles will not be visiting the White House, as the visit was canceled by the president just earlier yesterday, which was yesterday. But the cancellation comes in the wake of finding out that a lot of the Eagles are going to attend anyway. But the president, according to his tweets, is making it an issue about the handle policy. But the big impact is teams might get stopped in the White House, but they might just stop invited. Like this might become something of the past, where teams are going to the White House to be recognized for winning a championship. This seems like it's more, challenging stories than just an honor. Well, what's your take as an Eagles fan? This is your team.
I'm proud of them because they stuck to their guns. The stance that they've taken all season, and they haven't. They didn't kneel once, despite what Fox tried to portray. I mean, I don't know if you saw that when it first came out. They had pictures of guys praying, and one of the guys was Jordan Matthews, who wasn't even on the team last year.
Yeah.
They literally had to go to a picture from 2 years ago to try and convey their false argument. And it's just it makes Trump look bad, in my opinion, because he's falsifying a narrative because guys don't like him and don't agree with his policies, and he's butthurt about it, that they don't want to come see him. And to me, it's you can't continue saying negative things about players or a team or an organization or whatever, and expect them to just look past it. I mean, to call these guys sons of bitches and to tell them that if they don't stand for the flag or whatever, they shouldn't be allowed in the country. They know about that. It's not just something that's gonna pass by them. There's a reason they've been, fighting for equality, and the whole thing that's been going on hasn't even been about the reasoning that they made the excuse for of why they're not coming. But there's guys that said we weren't coming in the first place, but it's also not fair to the people that wanted to go. I knew Carson Wentz wanted. I don't know if Carson wanted to go per se, but I knew he would go. He wasn't going to stir the pot. But it's good to know that they have each other's backs and are willing to miss a trip for a photo op. That's more than what it is than anything else. Going to take a picture. It's not.
That's what I actually found a very compelling website I just thought. Very liberal. The NFL, their percentage, African American, you could see them having a large people that don't like Trump. But Tory Smith, who actually is not with longer, had a very good group on it, mentioning how it's not fair to be wanted to go. Because even if you're not wanted to go, because certainly the players or the owner, people that are, I know the owner is not, but just say the people that are aligned obviously would want to go. And even those not very politically motivated, it's a cool experience. You get to go to the White House with all that history and the capital of the country. So those people that want to go back to them. But I understand it's the photo op I talked about that I think is really honoring and hurting his ego. Because I think he could honestly give it a class if the players disagree. But the picture, when Al Bear everyone's there. You have the code, the trophy. Same thing kind of went to the White House. You got everybody there. It sounds like the picture would have been the owner. He said he would go, even though he's not coming.
Right, he would have gone to be, because he felt like it was the right thing to do.
Yeah. The picture would have been owner,
Carson Wentz.
Let's say 10 to 15 players, for argument's sake, and then the and then there's going to be a lot of, and then the headlines, only non-10 Eagles coming to see President Trump. That's just not something that goes out. So it's a situation.
Right,
and him, I don't see where.
Yeah, I mean, him uninviting them was sort of, he knew not a lot of people were coming. They made that very clear throughout the season. Well, not throughout the season, but once they won the title, they made it very clear that there were definitely a handful of guys that there was no shot they were going, and I think a lot of guys were sort of on board with that, so there weren't going to be a lot of people going to start with, and it was sort of, instead of him looking bad, and saying, oh, we have this whole thing set up and no one's coming, we can just say scrap it, and it looks like I was the one that was in charge, even though really it was the players and the team itself that took control and canceled it. And I can clearly see this happening time and time again. LeBron said, I think yesterday, said no matter who wins, they're not going. So if the Warriors win, that's 2 years in a row they don't go to the White House. Mm-hmm. Like that's gotta say, if you're a right-minded person, you have to think to yourself and say, okay, I need to change. In the case of Donald Trump, you need to say, okay, I need to change the way I handle things, because I'm starting to see him almost in a Kanye West sort of mentality. It's like he says all this stuff. He says all this stuff to the point where he actually believes it's the right thing. Like a right-minded person wouldn't say that just because someone doesn't stand for a national anthem, or whatever, that they should be kicked out of a country. Like that's just like a right-minded person wouldn't think that way.
There's not of a state that Kanye is like at least partially of Trump, because a lot of him said the guy that does whatever he wants and doesn't really have to deal with repercussions. But yeah, I agree. When you're the president and you know that professional athletes, a large community, especially the ones that are going to be more liberal, and the media covering them, a large portion of them is going to be liberal. All you can control is how you handle them, and you should be able to make a bigger person for the ones that want to go. It's not about you. It's about celebrating the team.
And that's part of the issue, is that he's making this about him more so than about the actual event and what it signifies. Whereas, I mean, I can't think of one time where I've ever seen a team not go to the White House. I can't think of one time throughout Obama's 8 years, throughout George Bush, the short time that I remember him in office, and then just any other time. I just haven't heard of that ever. So this has got to be a wake-up call to him. I don't expect it to be a wake-up call because he's, an old man, and once you get to a certain age, you just don't care. But as a president, you should.
Yeah, I'm watching High Noon. It's a new show on ESPN.
Yeah.
And Pablo made a good point. He did a little bit of it. And all the way to Ronald Reagan. There's almost always a few players that decide not to go for political reasons. But now it's almost the whole game. But in all of those cases, the president, whoever they may be, Reagan, Carter, Bush, Clinton, any of them, they never uninvited the team. Because it's about celebrating the team. And if you don't want to go, you don't have to. But you should still say, hey, we're celebrating the team. If you don't want to come, I mean, that's fine. I'm not making it about me. He's just like, no, you know what? I don't want to play with you. You're uninvited. And that just makes the whole situation spiral more. But it's getting so politicized now that I wouldn't be shocked. They just like stop going to the White House and they stop being invited. Might be a thing of the past. Because now it's becoming like, if you go, people are reading their political.
Right. There's no. It's a lose-lose situation for whatever team goes, or whatever happens to whatever the championship team decides to do. Because you go, you're looked at as saying you're giving in, but if you don't go, you're looked at as protesting, and then you get berated by Trump and his tweet. It's one of those situations where in this day and age, like it just doesn't make sense anymore. But yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be surprising if they just canceled the whole thing, like forever, just having teams. And maybe it's just for this administration. I don't know, but it's when you're so polarizing and always needing the attention to be a president, like that's not okay. I thought about this last night. I'm like, if you want to be polarizing, be about yourself. Go join the WWE. You can go talk about how great you are till you're blue in the face. But right now he's gotta figure his whole shtick out and figure out a way to not be so combative and realize that he's just spewing lies at times.
Well, Trump did make WWE.
He did. It's true.
But, it could be an administrative thing, but I think it's more of a political climate.
Right.
Because even if we switch presidents next election, if it's still as divided as it is now, you're always going to have players and coaches that don't want to go.
Well, I think it depends on the person. If a person can bring, the situation that's going on in America and across sports to a more of a boil, or less of a boil, and sort of find a way to combat the issues and find a middle ground, then that's one thing. But if you get a guy, and there's never going to be another person like Donald. There's no one that can be to that extreme, unless you get some crazy liberal person that's out of his mind and whatever. Which there are some. There are the Donald Trumps, but of liberals. There's plenty of them. They just don't get the same notice because they're not the president. But that's sort of the issue with this presidency right now. Is he takes things to extremes and has people believe that, and part of why he ran as a Republican was because he said they were stupid and it would be easy, and look what happened. These are facts. He said that.
No, I know. There's a lot of ways you've done stuff that make your head spin.
Yeah.
But let's move on now. Back to sports. NHL Game 5. It's a 3-1 lead for the Washington Capitals. They split in Vegas. Vegas won Game 1. And the Caps, that's on a little bit of a run. Game 5 is, I believe, Thursday, with the Caps, a chance in Vegas to win their first Stanley Cup in the history of the franchise. Vegas, on the other hand, also pretty good for Stanley Cup in the franchise, as this is only the first year. So, Vegas before the I said Cap. I'm going to stick with Cap in 6. But what does Vegas do to turn it around, try to come back?
I mean, based on what we saw in Game 4, it's definitely got to be the defense. They got to step up on that, letting up 3 goals in the first period. I think it was 4 goals in total by the end of the first 2 periods combined. It was either 4 or 5, I can't remember. But they just gave them so many opportunities, especially early on. It was simple little just mistakes in reads on the defensive side of the ice, defensive side of the puck, that shouldn't have happened. I mean, when you let up 6 goals, part of that's on Fleury, of course, as the goalie. Part of that's also got to be on the defense. They had to step up, and I think they had to be better in the forecheck and just, find ways to pressure Washington a lot more, because when I watched I didn't get to watch the whole game, but I watched part of it, and it seemed like it was always Washington on the attack. Every time I looked up, they were passing the puck back and forth in their zone, in Vegas' zone, and just toying with them, it seemed. So they need to figure out a defensive strategy. I think they just got to come out with ruthless aggression and start hitting. and try and get in the Capitals' heads in any way possible, and that'll maybe springboard them into a victory, and then they have a chance to come home and in Vegas and play for a Game 6 and maybe advance on to a Game 7. But definitely defensively, they just got to be strong, and I think they just have to become more impactful in terms of the aggressiveness that they bring to the ice.
I think that sounds right. Now, I'm not a hockey guy called lingo. I couldn't tell you what the face-off ratio situation is, but I do understand sports momentum and dictating play. In Washington had all the momentum. After they were on the road, they came home in front of a rabid fans and took control of the series. And like you said, when I'm watching it, it seems like Washington's always on the attack. They're the ones putting points on the net. They're the ones relentlessly going toward the crease, getting those rebounds, putting back in. And that's what I need to see from Vegas. They're going to come back. Now, Game 5 is in Las Vegas.
Right. So I think that's going to be a huge game changer.
Yeah, they've been coming in front of their home fans. Home cooking. And they have to win 6-3. That's daunting. But two of those three would be at home. So really, they just steal one game. And if they come out in Game 5 and set the pace, I could easily see a team like the Capitals, who's famous for choking Game 6, and then all of a sudden you're back home in front of your home fans in Game 7 to come on the line. So a lot's going to be determined in Game 5.
Yeah. Being home, I think they definitely win Game 5 at home just because that crowd in Vegas is so behind them, shockingly enough, as we've talked about numerous times in this podcast about how strong their fan base is despite it being their first year. And apparently they're going to have a parade, win or lose, which I guess is pretty cool. Sort of thank them for what they've done because they haven't had a sports team I don't think they've ever had a sports team in Las Vegas. So, they brought a whole new way of life to there. But I think they win Game 5, and then Game 6 can be a crapshoot depending on how Game 5 ends, especially if it's a big win or maybe a win that's real tight. That sort of comes down to the end, and there's a lot of momentum built into that win. So then they go on to Game 6, and it can be a crapshoot. And if they come out Game 6 and pull off a victory, I don't see how they lose the series because to be back home tied 3-3, I mean, at that point the series starts over again, and it's a one-game playoff at that point, and winner takes all. So. The Capitals strung off 3 straight victories. It's not impossible to do, but it obviously starts with a really good start in Game 5. If they can have a strong first period, then I think it'll definitely dictate how the entire game goes.
Yeah, I think something we'll talk about going forward is Las Vegas, sports city. I don't had a team recently. Now they've got a team in the NHL that makes the Stanley Cup Finals this year. I think they've got a team now too. The Raiders are coming in a couple of years. They'll have an NFL team. And if the fans are rowdy those teams as they are for the night, Vegas could be a great American sports city that we've just never had before. So that would be something to keep an eye on. But before we put up the show, in honor of Washington's wonder in Game 1, we're going to do our top 5 sports wonder of all time. Let's go back to the communities. So I'm going to go my number 1 is very famous Bill Buckner, right between his legs. Looks like the Red Sox are going to break I don't know, what was like 85-year drought at that time. All you had to do was hit the ball to win the World Series, but it goes between his hands, and then New York go on to win. Huge error. Routine correct.
Yeah. So mine are in no real particular order per se. Just I sort of listed them out. But the top one that I wrote down was in Dallas. The Eagles are playing the Cowboys, and Deshaun Jackson, just about 1 foot before he reached the end zone, dropped the ball, thinking that he was in the clear and had the easy touchdown. And I think that was the opportunity for his first career. If I remember correctly, I think that was his first career touchdown that it would have been. And then just like half a yard away, he dropped the ball and cost them. And I believe they lost that game too, if I can remember correctly.
Yeah, those are all tough. There's a lot of premature touchdown celebrations that come to mind when you're doing this, but didn't make my list. My only football one, so my biggest one is the Super Bowl a couple years ago.
I have that one.
Pete Carroll not giving the ball to Marshawn, and Russell throwing an interception to Malcolm Butler. And so not only was that Super Bowl, but now that the stock's kind of broken up, that Pete Carroll did in fact lead the team. They didn't really trust him. And so that dynasty died right there.
Right. Yeah, I had that one on my list as well. So I guess I'll go to my third one. Miracle at the Meadowlands, Part 1. There's obviously Part 2 with Deshaun Jackson ending the heroic comeback with a game-winning punt return for a touchdown. He did not drop the ball before the end zone this time, but Miracle at the Meadowlands, Part 1. The Giants were up 17-12. This is November 17th, 1978, I believe. Maybe November. I can't remember the exact date, but I know it was November of 1978. Joe Pisarcik could have just kneeled down, and the chance for the Eagles to have a chance at the NFC wild card was on the line as well. Could have kneeled down. For some reason, decided to hand the ball off. Herm Edwards jumps it, gets the fumble, and returns it for a touchdown. And never forget, to this day, Eagles fans will never forget that.
That's a tough one.
It is.
My next one is a little bit but I've seen the tape. We actually watched it in Games class to observe the broadcast. The 1984 Orange Bowl that Tom Osborne elected to go for the Super Bowl to try to beat Miami instead of kicking the extra point and tying it. And had he tied it, they probably would have got at least a share of national championship, if not outright. But he goes for two. Get it. And Nebraska, every. As then Miami wins. And their national champion.
Yeah, it's a very good one. My fourth one actually sort of aligns in a way with your Buckner one, because it has to do with the Red Sox, and the Red Sox selling Babe Ruth for $100,000 all those years ago. Obviously, we all know what happens next. He goes to the Yankees, joins, and they become what they are now as the winningest team in MLB history, and then that sort of started off the curse of the Bambino of the Red Sox never winning a World Series until obviously 2004. So that was a huge one to them, and one of the more famous, not necessarily in-game blunders, but definitely had a effect overall for a long time for that team.
Yeah, how much difference for that in that Red Sox rivalry. It was really jump start by that Babe Ruth period. I'm going to go to my only basketball in honor of Jeff and the timeout there. Going to the 1993 NCAA championship game, and the famous Chris Webber calling a timeout when they didn't have one, and that would, in a technical, cost Michigan the back 5 the game, and they lose the national championship to North Carolina by 2 points.
Yeah, it was a bad one. My fifth and final actually is soccer, and ended with a death. Andre Escobar's own goal in '94 World Cup. Colombia was a heavy favorite to win it. Ends up giving up an own goal and gets killed because of it. It's murdered in '94 shortly after it, because it eventually took Colombia out of the World Cup and a chance to win. So that was the most intense of the list for sure. Was their reaction to that?
Soccer fans are. We're gonna get some talk with the World Cup. So my last is very personal to me. Not because I happened to, but because I make it all the time. So I'm actually going to the 1990 British Open in golf. And the famous John Vanderbilt. He was coming down on the 18th hole. All he needed to do was make a double bogey to win the championship. He would have been the first right guy to win the tournament in 1907, and it would have been his only major of his career. So he kind of hits one close to the hands after the goes into the water, and then takes shoes and socks off. Instead of dropping, tries to hit it from the water, and it goes nowhere. He ends up hitting it like a 9 on the hole, and loses the whole time. But I was just playing golf the other day, and it iced something so hard. Trying to beat my dad and my mother. Because I know I just had a number, I can shoot like one over them. I choke like every time. But that's a huge one.
You got to work on your game then.
I do. So do you have one more?
I did my 5.
Okay. I was just on 5. So you're in Chicago. Later today, Phillies Cubs going at it on the field. So we've got best as the Phillies Cubs trying to make some runs. We'll talk about later, but in Chicago, my favorite cities in the world, and good luck coming into it. I will see you there to talk NBA Finals for our next show.
Sounds good.
Last word, go Cubs.
Go Phillies. Come on now.